This is the Korg Opsix. There are many Korg Opsixes out there, but this one is mine. And there really are a lot of these things out there, especially on the second-hand market, like this one. It was bought second-hand for about 350 bucks, including a deck saver. And the reason why there are so many on the second-hand market is kind of twofold. First off, this is a V1 Opsix. Now the difference between the V1 and the V2 is basically down to the processor, with the V1 being able to do 32 voices of polyphony and the V2 being able to do 64 voices of polyphony. Now with 6 operators, if you have them all active at the same time, that's 6 voices per key press, so it's sort of a big deal, but at the same time it also kind of isn't, because the likeliness of you hitting that number is not all that big. But of course it is a sign that when things get more processor intensive, this thing might not do the trick anymore, and that might be troubling for the future of the Korg Opsix. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There are many out there, and this one has been replaced by the V2, and at that point Korg sold off a lot of V1s at a very strong discount. That's why you will see them at a very low price. I think they sold them at around 300-400 USD. So yeah, that's a pretty big discount from the usual 600-700 euro range. The other reason why you see a lot of these around is because it's a little bit of a controversial synthesizer. And the main complaint with the Korg Opsix has to do with the build quality. So it's, I think, a good place to start before we start talking about the sound engine and all that stuff. Let's just talk a little bit about how this thing is built. Now, if you ever are in the position of picking one of these up, you might notice that aside from grip, it's very one-handable because it weighs basically nothing. Especially for something this big, it's toyishly light, which is the sort of #1 complaint to start with. I think if they just put in a metal black plate, probably half the people complaining about the build quality would have been, oh, it's pretty solid. But as it is, it's a very light, plasticky thing, which is great if you're gigging, but not all that confidence inspiring. The keybed is very, very light and cheap-ish, synthesizer-ish, but at the same time working perfectly fine for most stuff. No aftertouch, so yeah, if you're into that stuff, that's a bummer. And it's very basic. At the top of the keybed you get these 2 modulation wheels and a pitch wheel. Now the wheels are fine. The pitch wheel is spring loaded, the other one is not. Personally, I'm not a big fan of this style of interface because I like to be able to pitch bend and modulate at the same time, and I lack every ability with my fingers to do that with wheels. I don't know why. I'll probably never learn it, but I like the joysticky things like the D50 or the GDXA because you can easily pitch bend and modulate at the same time. I think that's just easier. Then again, this style is seen on a lot of synthesizers and a lot of people like it, so that's not all that big a deal. The sliders are very cheap feeling, and so are the knobs, although they do have a little bit of stiffness to them, which is kind of nice, but it isn't incredibly high quality feeling, which is of course not really a problem if you pay $300 for a synth, but I can definitely imagine if you paid the full 600 to, I've seen them go up to 800, yeah, you're going to be fairly disappointed with the build quality of this thing. Now for longevity I can't say much about it. I haven't had it that long and I'm not someone who takes it on the road. I would imagine if you want to take this on the road you definitely want to bring in a case, just to make sure that it's safe. But the lightness also has some upsides. It's very easy to carry around, and it's overall, it's fine. It's not great, definitely not for the price, but I think that if you pick one up secondhand, you can definitely forgive the flaws for all the good stuff that is in this synthesizer. And I think that's something that we need to dive into a little bit deeper to understand what this thing actually does, because a lot of people seem to think it's just a FM synthesizer. It sort of says on the can, it says Opsix, Altered FM Synth on the back, but it is a lot more than just an FM synthesizer, and I think that's a little bit overlooked, and that actually makes this a incredibly awesome tool to learn synthesis, but also to get some really interesting sounds. So let's dive into the synth engine, and that is something we are going to do on the desk because it's hard to play like this. Alright, so here we are with the Opsix on the desk, and I'm going to preemptively say this is going to be a two-parter video because I've shot this before and it actually took quite a while to go through the entire synth. So for part 1 we will focus on some of the basic operations of the Opsix and a little bit of an explanation on how this is more than just a FM synth. And then in part 2 we'll dive a little bit deeper into the limitations and the flexibility of this synth. So just to start off, Opsix 6 operator synthesizer. These are the 6 operators. You can think of it as basically oscillators. It's just a fancy FM term because not every operator is an operator you can hear. The operators you can hear are the carriers, which are red, and the operators you can't hear are the modulators, and those are blue. Now you can switch the synth into a mode where every single operator is a carrier, in which case you essentially have a 6 oscillator subtractive or additive synth, which is pretty dope. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just start off with a basic operator and let's go through some of the sounds. Basic functionality is that the slider is for the level, and the knob is for the ratio or the pitch. So that's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. You can change the sound of the oscillator either by going into the mode and turning the bottom left control. These controls are aligned to the 6 positions on the screen. So top left is the mode, top right is the width, bottom left is the wave shape, and the other 2 are disabled in this specific configuration. So let's go through some wave shapes. And these wave shapes are also available through a shortcut. That's holding the shift button and moving the slider. So you can see that the wave shapes are changing here. So that's pretty convenient. Let's stick to a saw for now. One thing that is a little bit annoying with the Opsix is that there's no way to couple your operator you're working with to the screen. So whenever you want to change the parameters of another operator, you need to select the operator through the little button here. And the little light will indicate which operator is active at this moment. So we're still looking at operator 1 right now. And every operator has its own pitch settings. So right now it's set to a ratio. You can also set it to a fixed pitch. Which can be useful for FM. Transpose is also available here. Detune. And coarse tuning. For all your pitch annoyances. Every operator also has a envelope generator. Once again, top controls, attack, decay, release, attack, decay, release. So we can increase the attack. Now the Opsix allows for some pretty insane lengths. As you can see, 90 seconds, that's pretty insane. You can also keep it a lot shorter, of course. If you need fine controls, just hold shift, and if you turn the dial, you will turn it in smaller increments than with just the dial itself. Release goes all the way to 90 seconds as well. Let's not do that. There you go. A main level. level control per operator here as well, which is just the same as this control, but in a different place. Changing the curve will make it either linear or exponential. It's a bit hard to see on the screen, but it fades between a totally linear and a totally exponential curve. You can't change the curve per point, you change the curve for all the points at once. It's a little bit of a limitation. It's also not the worst. You can set the highest and lowest note for a particular operator if you want to do splits or multi-timbral things. And you can couple the level to a modulator from this shortcut screen. Same goes for pitch, by the way. The pitch is controlled by envelope generator 1 by default and LFO 1. So if you want to So those are just some shortcuts you can use here. Now for velocity, that's available on the keyboard itself. But there's no aftertouch on this keypad, which for the price tag is a little bit disappointing, but it is what it is. That's your main operator controls, which are accessible straight from the front panel with the controls above. Now, it is of course an FM synth, and in its default configuration, this is initialized, it will be in one of the standard operator modes, meaning that the second operator is a modulator, and that means that we can do some FM stuff. For this I'm just going to set it to a sine wave. Now we can mix in and the first thing you might notice is that the second I let go of the key, that FM effect is gone, and that's because this operator of course has its own envelope, which doesn't have the long release time. And this is quite fun because you can quite easily do some FM shenanigans without having to do any actual menu diving. I mean, it's still a little bit of clicking around, but it's pretty visual and it's directly linked to these encoders. So it's very direct in its functionality, which is very nice to have in a FM synth. It's definitely a step up from many of the old school FM synths where you really need to do everything with a single data entry slider. This has everything pretty accessible right from the top. Now you can also FM with other things than sine waves if you want to. Let's do, for instance, a saw. The thing with FM is that it gets pretty gnarly pretty quickly once you move away from sine waves. Which is definitely a vibe. Let's make that operator 1 release a little bit shorter. Now, on top of the entire patch that you're building with the different operators, everything gets funneled into a mixer, and that mixed signal is sent into your filter, which is a good point to go next. Now, there is no dedicated filter cutoff knob, which I think is a real shame, because that's one of those performance controls which a lot of people tend to use. If you want to do filter stuff, you need to explicitly be in the filter tab, which is sort of an odd choice. I think they could have crammed in a filter knob, but we don't have one. Pretty smooth filters. By default coupled to the envelope generator 2. Now you get a fair few filter modes. All with their own characteristics, which is pretty cool. You can also turn the filter off if you don't want to use it. And again, it's controlled by default by envelope generator 2. You can also control it with different controls, like the mod wheel, pitch wheel, pedal, velocity, etc. Before we dive a little bit deeper into stuff, let's go over the effects as well. You have 3 effect slots, and these effects go once again over the entire patch you're building. There's no way to bypass the effects, which I think is a little bit of a limitation here, because it can be useful to have operators that simply bypass the effects, something you can't do on this synthesizer. Effect selection is pretty wide, going from chorus, unison, also phasers, planners, flangers, rotary speakers, wahs. Sim stuff, decimators. For this we need a little bit more bite. But we also have a delay. With individual controls for the left and right channel. speed synced. And this functions as a analog style delay. Which is always fun to mess around with. Tape echo. And I think an important category to look at are the reverbs. Let's actually make the release really short, so we get the maximal reverb. I would say those are some pretty solid reverbs with a lot of options. Separate shimmer reverb. Not the most options there, but it's nice to have a dedicated string reverb. Useful to have as well. Let's turn off the effects. Let's talk about one more thing that's important for this video. Let's quickly dive into the other operator modes, because so far we have had this operator set to the FM mode. There's actually a whole world of other operators you can choose from. So in the FM mode you get a feedback. And a weight width. There's also other modes like a ring mod mode. A filter mode. This one is especially interesting because this filter is just for this one operator. It is of a lower quality though, it's pretty steppy. But it is super useful. You also have the filter FM option. wave folder. For your extra nasty operators. An effects operator, which allows you to use some effects. On an operator basis. You can bypass or entirely mute the operators as well, which is handy if you're not using all operators to free up some polyphony, because you'll of course have a polyphony limit, and with 6 operators that's a little bit easier to hit if you use all operators, so you can shut them down if you don't need them. So one more thing to quickly cover is the algorithm section, which can be called upon with the Algo knob. Here you can change your algorithms with the top left knob. There's a whole bunch of options. 40 pre-programmed ones, and you can actually make your own algorithms as well. But one that's interesting to take a look at is 32, and in 32 all the carriers or all the operators are carriers, and this allows for some other neat things. So what you can do, for instance, is if we set all of these to saws, and we actually activate them all. And we set them all at ratio 1. We just get one really big saw, which is pretty loud. And now we can actually go into the pitch mode and detune some of these operators to create a super saw. So let's say we take this one. If we're in pitch mode, we can actually detune. And now, because we have per operator control, we can also make it a little bit thicker by lowering some of these operators to a lower ratio. And if this wasn't enough, you can of course go into the effects and grab the unison ensemble, mix in some unison ensemble. Some pretty dope big unison sounds. So yeah, that's a good point to leave for this video. In the next one we will take a little bit of a look at the modulation matrix, some mod options, and we'll talk a little bit about where the limitations are with the Opsix, so you have a little bit of an idea of what this thing can and can't do. But I hope this already gave you an impression that it's actually a pretty flexible synthesizer, where a lot of people will kind of downplay it as an FM synth. It's actually capable of doing quite a bit more if you're into meddling around with it a little bit. But there's definitely some downsides as well, like the pretty plasticky build and the not incredibly interesting keypad. That's definitely some downsides, and the sliders and knobs feeling fairly cheapish doesn't inspire the most confidence long run. But at the same time, if you take care of your stuff, it's probably fine for quite a while. So yeah, that's it for this video. Let's move on to video number 2 if you're interested, and if not, well, that's fine as well. Have a great day and see ya.